The town of Dust Rock lay sprawled beneath the relentless Arizona sun like a dying animal, its weathered buildings casting meager shadows against the red earth. Wind carried grit through the unpaved streets, coating everything in a fine layer of rust-colored dust that seemed to seep into the very souls of those who called this place home. It was 1873, and civilization had barely scratched its mark upon this unforgiving landscape. From her vantage point on the hillside, Nora Blackwood could see the entire town laid out below, the general store with its faded sign, the saloon that never seemed to close, the church with its crooked steeple pointing accusingly toward heaven. She pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders. Though the evening was still warm, 28 years had taught her that cold came in many forms, and not all of it had to do with weather. The townsfolk called her a witch. They whispered it in the mercantile when she came down once a month for supplies, muttered it behind gloved hands at church socials she was never invited to attend. The braver ones said it to her face, spitting the word like tobacco juice into the dirt. Witch. All because she lived alone, kept to herself, and knew which roots could break a fever and which leaves could ease a birthing pain. Nora turned from the view and walked back to her cabin, her boots crunching on the sparse grass. 3 goats looked up from their pen as she passed, bleating a greeting. She paused to scratch behind the ears of the eldest, a temperamental billy goat she'd named Samuel after the preacher who'd first branded her with suspicion. The irony amused her in a bitter sort of way. The cabin wasn't much, 2 rooms cobbled together from salvaged lumber and held upright more by stubbornness than skill. But it was hers, built with her own hands after everything had burned. Inside, bundles of herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with a scent of sage and feverfew. Shelves lined one wall, crowded with jars of tinctures and salves. A narrow bed occupied one corner, a pot-bellied stove another. It was a life stripped down to its bones, but it was a life nonetheless. She lit a kerosene lamp as darkness crept across the desert, the familiar ritual bringing a measure of peace in the growing shadows. She could almost forget the weight of other people's fear, almost pretend she'd chosen this isolation rather than had it thrust upon her. Almost. Miles away. Jace Calder rode through the gathering dusk with death at his heels. His horse's labored breathing matched his own. Both man and beast pushed to their limits by 3 days of hard riding. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage on his left shoulder, each movement sending fresh fire through the wound. But stopping meant dying. And Jace had too many ghosts already without adding his own to their number. He'd been running for near on 3 years now. Ever since that night in Tucson, when the world had tilted off its axis and never quite righted itself. The memory rose unbidden, muzzle flash in the dark. His brother Eddie's eyes wide with surprise, the way he dropped like a marionette with its strings cut. Jace shook his head hard, trying to dislodge the image. Now wasn't the time. Now was for staying alive. Behind him? Somewhere in the vast expanse of desert and rock. Dwight Morrison followed with 2 hired guns. They'd picked up his trail in Prescott, and Jace had been running ever since. Dwight had been there that night in Tucson, had seen what happened. Knew it for the accident it was. But grief and whiskey had twisted his mind, turned former friendship into an obsession for revenge. He blamed Jace for Eddie's death, and maybe he was right to. God knew Jace blamed himself enough. The horse stumbled, nearly sending Jace from the saddle. He grabbed for the pommel, his wounded shoulder screaming protest. They needed water, needed rest, needed a miracle. Through the haze of exhaustion and pain, he spotted lights in the distance. A town, maybe, or a ranch. Either way, it meant the possibility of help, or at least a place to make a stand. He urged the horse forward, whispering encouragement to the animal that had carried him so far. Just a little further, just until they reached those lights. The horse managed a few more strides before its front legs buckled. Jace had enough time to kick free of the stirrups before they went down hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs and sending white-hot agony through his shoulder. For a moment, he lay still, listening to his horse's labored breathing and the vast silence of the desert night. Then, with effort that felt superhuman, he pushed himself to his knees. The horse was done for. He could see that even in the darkness. Its sides heaved with each breath, foam flecking its mouth. Jace placed a hand on the animal's neck, feeling the rapid pulse beneath sweat-soaked hide. "I'm sorry, boy," he whispered, reaching for his Colt. The shot echoed across the emptiness, a final punctuation to their journey together. Jace holstered the gun and struggled to his feet. Those lights seemed impossibly far now, but what choice did he have? He started walking, each step an act of will. His shoulder had gone numb, which worried him more than the pain had. The world began to blur at the edges, darkness creeping in from the periphery of his vision. Still he walked, fixed on those distant lights like a drowning man on shore. Time lost meaning. There was only the next step, and the next, and the next. When his legs finally gave out, he wasn't surprised. The ground rose up to meet him, and he had just enough presence of mind to break his fall with his good arm. He lay there, cheek pressed to the still warm earth, and wondered if this was how it ended. Not in a blaze of gunfire, but alone in the dark, bled out like a stuck pig. The last thing Jace saw before unconsciousness claimed him was a pair of worn boots stepping into his field of vision. Then nothing but black. Nora had been mixing a poultice for her goat's infected hoof when she heard the gunshot. Sound carried strangely in the desert at night, but she judged it to be less than a mile away. She stood frozen at her work table, mortar and pestle still in hand. Waiting, no more shots came, which could mean many things, most of them bad. She might have ignored it, should have ignored it. Whatever drama was playing out in the darkness was none of her concern. She'd learned the hard way what came of involving herself in other people's troubles. But something, instinct, perhaps, or merely the curse of a healer's nature, made her set down her tools and reach for the rifle by the door. The moon was rising, casting silver light across the landscape. She moved carefully down the hillside, every sense alert. It didn't take long to find him, a dark shape sprawled motionless on the ground, looking for all the world like death had already claimed him. Nora approached cautiously, rifle ready, but the man didn't stir. She knelt beside him, setting the rifle within easy reach, and placed 2 fingers against his neck, a pulse, thready but present. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking for wounds. The shoulder was bad. She could smell the blood even before her fingers found the sodden fabric. But it was the head wound that concerned her more, a gash along his temple that had bled freely down the side of his face. The sensible thing would be to leave him. A man with wounds like these was running from something, and whatever chased him would likely follow. But as she looked at his face in the moonlight, younger than she'd expected, marked by sun and hardship but not unkind, she found herself unable to walk away. Perhaps she was a fool. Perhaps the townspeople were right about her after all, and some perverse nature drove her to court disaster. Or perhaps she was simply tired of being the only living thing in her cabin that drew breath. Getting him back to the cabin proved harder than expected. He was lean, but solid muscle, and unconscious bodies had a way of being twice as heavy as they ought to be. She ended up fashioning a travois from branches and her own shawl, dragging him up the hillside like a sack of grain. By the time she got him inside, her back ached and sweat soaked through her dress despite the cooling night air. She maneuvered him onto her bed, the only bed, and lit every lamp she owned. In the yellow light, she could better assess the damage. The shoulder wound was from a bullet, passed clean through by the look of it. Lucky, if such a word applied. The head wound was superficial but messy. She'd seen worse, tended worse, though usually the patients had been conscious and grateful rather than potential harbingers of doom. As she worked, cleaning, stitching, binding, she studied the stranger's face. Deep lines around his eyes spoke of too much squinting into the sun, or perhaps too much pain. His hands were calloused but clean, the hands of a man who worked but took pride in himself. The gun belt she'd removed was well oiled. The Colt it held equally maintained. Everything about him spoke of competence. of a man who took care with details. So how had he ended up half dead at her doorstep? By the time she finished, dawn was breaking across the desert, painting the world in shades of rose and gold. The stranger lay still on her bed, breathing easier now, though fever had begun its inevitable claim. Nora sank into her chair by the stove, exhausted but unable to rest. She'd crossed a line by bringing him here. She knew. Whatever came next, her carefully constructed isolation had been breached. Outside, her goats began their morning complaints, demanding breakfast. Life went on, regardless of the drama that humans created. She pushed herself up, bones protesting, and went to tend them, but her eyes kept drifting to the cabin, to the man who lay within, to the future that suddenly seemed less certain than it had just yesterday. The Witch of Dustrock had taken in a wounded stranger. The town would have opinions about that. She was sure. But for now, in the quiet of morning with only the goats for witness, Nora allowed herself to feel something she hadn't in years, a flicker of curiosity about what tomorrow might bring. Nora stood at the threshold of her cabin, watching the stranger breathe. 3 days had passed since she'd dragged him from the desert floor. 3 days of fever dreams and restless thrashing that had tested both her healing skills and her patience. She'd spooned willow bark tea between his cracked lips, changed sweat-soaked bandages, and whispered words she barely remembered from her mother's bedside prayers, not because she believed in their power, but because the sound of a human voice seemed to calm him. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, she supposed, though she tried not to dwell on such observations. The fever had brought color to his cheeks, making him look younger than the lines on his face suggested. 30, perhaps, or a bit older. His hair was dark with sweat, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. More than once, she'd caught herself studying the scar that ran along his jawline, wondering at its origin. This was dangerous thinking. She knew better than to see anything in this man beyond a patient who would heal and leave. That was the bargain she'd made with herself when she'd chosen to save him. Temporary mercy. Nothing more. Men brought nothing but trouble, especially men who arrived with bullet wounds and the smell of gunpowder clinging to their clothes. She turned to her work table, grinding feverfew with perhaps more force than necessary. The familiar rhythm of pestle against mortar centered her, pushed away foolish notions. She had survived 7 years on this hillside by being practical, not sentimental. This stranger would not change that. A sound from the bed made her turn. His eyes were open, gray as winter sky, and sharp despite the lingering fever. He watched her with the wariness of a wounded animal, muscles tensed as though preparing to bolt. His hand moved slightly, searching for a weapon that wasn't there. "Your gun's on the shelf," Nora said, not moving from her place at the table. "Cleaned and oiled. Your rifle, too, though it took some damage in your fall." He tried to speak, managed only a croak. She filled a cup with water from the pitcher and approached slowly, giving him time to see she meant no harm. Up close, those gray eyes were even more unsettling, holding depths she didn't care to explore. "Small sips," she instructed, supporting his head with one hand. He drank carefully, his eyes never leaving her face. "Where?" The word came out rough as sandpaper. "My cabin, about a mile outside Dustrock." She set the cup aside and stepped back, creating distance between them. "You've been here 3 days. The fever broke this morning." He absorbed this information silently, his gaze traveling around the small space, taking in the herbs, the simple furniture, the lack of any other presence. When he looked back at her, something had shifted in his expression, a guardedness that spoke of a man who'd learned to be careful with trust. Why? Such a simple question. Yet she found herself without an easy answer. Because leaving him would have haunted her conscience. Because the healer in her couldn't walk away from suffering. Because the loneliness had finally grown teeth sharp enough to override her good sense. "You were dying," she said finally. "I know something of healing. The rest," she shrugged. "The rest doesn't matter." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Name's Jace," Jace called her. "Nora Blackwood." She returned to her work table, kneading the barrier between them. Your shoulder will need time to heal properly. The head wound was superficial, but you lost considerable blood. You'll be weak for a while yet." "Can't stay," he said immediately. "There are men who won't find you here unless you're fool enough to go stumbling back into the desert before you can sit a horse properly." Her voice came out sharper than intended. "Whatever trouble follows you, it'll have to wait until you're healed enough to face it." Something flickered across his features. Surprise, perhaps at being spoken to so bluntly. Then, unexpectedly, the ghost of a smile. "Yes, ma'am." Nora felt heat rise in her cheeks and turned away, busying herself with unnecessary tasks. This was exactly what she'd wanted to avoid, this sense of another person filling up the space, making it feel smaller and larger all at once. "There are rules," she said without turning around. "If you're to stay while you heal." "I'm listening. You don't touch me, ever, for any reason." She kept her voice steady, matter of fact. "You don't ask questions about my life before you came here. When you're well enough to travel, you leave and don't come back. And if anyone from town comes by, you stay silent and out of sight. That's a lot of rules." She turned then, meeting his gaze squarely. "This is my home, my sanctuary. I didn't have to save you, mister Calder. I'm not required to shelter you. If my conditions don't suit, you're free to take your chances with the desert." He was quiet for a moment, those gray eyes unreadable. Then he nodded. "Your rules, Miss Blackwood. I'll abide by them." "Good." She gathered a basket from its hook by the door. "I need to tend the goats. There's water in the pitcher. Bread and dried meat on the shelf if you feel able to eat. Don't try to stand yet, you'll tear the stitches." Outside, the morning air was crisp and clean, free of the sick room smell that had permeated the cabin. Nora breathed deeply, trying to settle the unease that had taken root in her chest. The goats greeted her with their usual enthusiasm, and she lost herself in the familiar routine of feeding and watering, checking hooves and eyes. When she returned, Jace had managed to pull himself partially upright, leaning against the wall behind the bed. Color had drained from his face with the effort, but his jaw was set with determination. "You're stubborn," she observed, setting the basket down harder than necessary. "That'll get you killed faster than any bullet." Been told that before. His voice was stronger now, though still rough. "Usually by people trying to put said bullets in me." "How many are looking for you?" He glanced at her sharply, and she raised an eyebrow. "I'm not asking about your past, Mr. Calder, but if armed men are likely to show up at my door, I'd like to know how many to expect." 3, maybe 4. He shifted, wincing. "Man named Dwight Morrison and whoever he's hired on. We had a disagreement. Must have been some disagreement." His face closed off, and she recognized the look. It was the same one she wore when people asked about the burn scars on her hands or why she lived alone on a hillside. Some stories were too heavy for telling. "I'll need to hide your horse's body," she said, changing the subject. "Buzzards will draw attention otherwise." "Already buried." At her surprised look, he almost smiled. "Woke up yesterday long enough to see to it. Couldn't manage much, but I could manage that. He deserved better than buzzards." This unexpected sentiment caught her off guard. She'd assumed, but no. Assumptions were dangerous things. "You shouldn't have been out of bed." "Probably not." He was looking at her with that unsettling directness again. "You talked to me while I was fevered. Heard your voice even when I couldn't make out words. Kept me anchored." Nora turned away, uncomfortable with the gratitude in his tone. Fever patients often do better with sound. It's nothing personal. "Still, thank you." The words hung between them, simple but weighted with meaning. She busied herself preparing a fresh poultice for his shoulder, aware of his eyes following her movements. The silence stretched, not quite comfortable but not entirely awkward either. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "What did you expect?" "Don't know. Someone older, maybe softer." He paused. "The people in town call you a witch." Her hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their work. Do they now? And what else do the good people of Dust Rock say about me? That you live alone doing God knows what, that you talk to spirits, that men who visit you are never quite the same after. There was a slight teasing note in his voice now, though his expression remained serious. Of course, they say a lot of things in towns like this. Doesn't make any of it true. Doesn't make it false either. She turned to face him. Poultice ready. This needs changing. Can you manage the shirt yourself? Or do you need help? He considered, then nodded toward the buttons. Afraid my left arm's not cooperating much yet. She approached carefully, mechanically, making her movements clinical and impersonal. But as she worked the buttons free and eased the fabric away from his shoulder, she couldn't help but notice the other scars, a puckered mark near his ribs that looked like an old knife wound, a long, pale line across his back. This was a man who'd lived hard and survived harder. Quite a collection, she murmured, beginning to unwrap the old bandage. Each one's a lesson learned. His voice had gone tight with pain as she worked, but he didn't flinch away. Some lessons stick better than others. The wound was healing well, no sign of infection. She applied the poultice with gentle efficiency, aware of the warmth of his skin, the rise and fall of his breathing. Too aware. She wrapped fresh bandages quickly and stepped back. There, that should hold you for another day or two. She helped him ease back into the shirt, trying not to notice the way his muscles moved beneath the skin. Are you hungry? You should eat. Build your strength back. I could manage some of that bread you mentioned. She busied herself preparing a simple meal. Bread, dried meat, a cup of the herbal tea that would help with pain and healing. He ate slowly, carefully, like a man who'd learned not to take food for granted. She found herself wondering about his story, about what kind of life produced such cautious gratitude. But that way lay danger. She'd learned long ago that curiosity about others led to connections, and connections led to pain. Better to maintain distance, to see him only as a temporary inconvenience to be endured until he could leave. You're a good healer, he said when he'd finished eating. Where'd you learn? My mother. The answer came before she could stop it. She had the gift, passed it on before she died. How long ago? She looked at him sharply, but there was no calculation in his expression. Just simple interest. Long enough. He nodded, accepting the non-answer without pressing. My mother died when I was 12. Fever took her one winter. Wish then we'd had someone like you nearby. The unexpected vulnerability in his words made her chest tight. She stood abruptly, collecting the empty plate. You should rest. Sleep's the best healer there is. But he was already sliding back down onto the bed, exhaustion overtaking him. Within minutes, his breathing had evened out into sleep. Nora stood watching him, this stranger who disrupted her careful solitude. 3 days, and already he was becoming too real, too present. She stepped outside, needing air and distance. The sun was climbing higher, casting short shadows across the red earth. Down in the valley, Dustrock went about its daily business, blissfully unaware of the drama playing out on the hillside. But that wouldn't last. Nothing stayed secret long in a small town, especially not something as potentially scandalous as the witch harboring a wounded stranger. Let them talk, she thought fiercely. They'd been talking about her for 7 years. What was one more story to add to their collection? But even as defiance flared, worry crept in alongside it, because this time was different. This time, there was someone else who might pay the price for her choices. She looked back at the cabin, then down at her hands. Healer's hands, marked by old burns and new calluses. Whatever came next. She'd brought it on herself the moment she'd chosen not to walk away. Now all she could do was see it through and hope the cost wouldn't be more than either of them could bear. The days settled into an unexpected rhythm. Each morning, Nora woke to find Jace already stirring, gray eyes tracking her movements as she went about preparing breakfast. He'd grown stronger over the past week, able to sit up without support and take short walks around the cabin's interior. She'd catch him testing his shoulder's range of motion when he thought she wasn't looking, jaw tight with determination. You'll tear those stitches if you're not careful, she warned one morning. not turning from where she mixed herbs at her table. "How'd you know I was—" He stopped, and she could hear the sheepish smile in his voice. "Right. Eyes in the back of your head. Forgot I was dealing with a witch." Despite herself, she felt her lips twitch. "Common sense, mister. Calder. Not magic, though I'll not correct the townsfolk if they prefer the more colorful explanation." He'd taken to helping with small tasks as his strength returned, grinding herbs with his good hand, keeping the fire fed, even attempting to cook simple meals when she was tending the goats. The first time she'd returned to find him stirring a pot of beans, she'd stopped short in the doorway, struck by how natural he looked in her space. "Hope you don't mind," he'd said, glancing up at her. "Figured I've imposed on your hospitality long enough without contributing something." "Can you actually cook?" she'd asked, skeptical. "Well enough to keep myself fed on the trail. Though I'll warn you, my seasoning choices tend towards salt and more salt." The beans had been edible, if bland, but something about eating food someone else had prepared, sitting across from another person at her small table, had made her throat tight with an emotion she couldn't name. Now, 10 days since she'd found him. Jace was splitting kindling in the yard while she worked on mending his shirt. The head wound had healed to a thin pink line, barely visible beneath his hair. His shoulders still pained him. She could see it in the careful way he moved, but he was healing well. Too well. Soon he'd have no reason to stay. The thought shouldn't have bothered her. This was what she'd wanted, what they'd agreed to. He would heal and leave, and her life would return to its careful solitude. But watching him work, his movements growing more fluid each day, she felt something like loss creeping in at the edges. "Goats loose," he called, and she looked up to see Samuel making a determined break for her herb garden. "Samuel, you devil!" She dropped the mending and rushed to intercept the ornery animal, who had developed a taste for her medicinal plants. Jace moved to help, and together they herded the goat back toward the pen, though not before he'd managed to snatch a mouthful of comfrey. "Samuel," Jace asked, amused, as they secured the gate. "After the preacher in town, they share a similar disposition, ornery and convinced of their own righteousness." He laughed then, a rich sound that seemed to surprise them both. "How'd you manage to make an enemy of a preacher?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "By existing, mostly. Being an unmarried woman who lives alone and knows more about healing than prayer. That's enough for some people. Their loss," he said simply, then seemed to catch himself. "I mean, I know what you meant." She turned away, flustered by the warmth in his voice. "The fence needs mending if Samuel's finding weak spots. I'll have to get supplies from town soon. I could go." The offer came quickly. "Least I could do after all you've—" "No." The word came out sharper than intended. "You're not known in town, but a stranger asking after supplies from me would raise more questions than I care to answer." He nodded, accepting the logic. But she saw something flicker in his eyes. Frustration, perhaps, at being dependent. She understood that feeling too well. That evening, rain began to fall. Not the violent thunderstorms that sometimes swept across the desert, but a steady, soaking rain that drummed on the roof and found every weak spot in the cabin's construction. Nora set pots and buckets under the worst leaks, muttering under her breath about repairs she'd put off too long. "Roof's been neglected." Jace observed from where he sat by the fire. "Everything's been neglected." She positioned another pot under a steady drip. "Usually doesn't matter. Desert doesn't see much rain." "Usually?" He stood, steadying himself against the wall. "Where are your tools? You're not fixing my roof." "Why not?" "Because you can barely lift your left arm above shoulder height, and I'll not have you falling and breaking your fool neck after all the work I've put into keeping you alive." He grinned at that. "Fair point, but I could at least look, see what needs doing, make you a list for when the weather clears." She wanted to refuse, to maintain the boundaries she'd set. But water was pooling on her floor, and pride seemed a luxury she couldn't afford. "Tools are in the lean-to out back, but you're only looking— Understand?" He gave her a mock salute and headed for the door. She watched him go, then busied herself with moving her herbs away from the spreading water. The rain intensified, and suddenly the drips became streams. She swore, a word her mother would have slapped her for, and grabbed more buckets. "It's worse than I thought," Jace said, returning with rain dripping from his hair. Whole section of roofs rotted through. Probably been letting water in slowly for years, weakening the beams, as if to emphasize his point. A chunk of ceiling chose that moment to give way, sending a cascade of water and debris onto the floor. They both jumped back, then stood staring at the hole now gaping above them. "Well," Nora said after a moment, "I suppose that settles that." They worked together to move everything of value away from the damaged area. By the time they finished, both were soaked through and the cabin felt like a very leaky boat. The fire sputtered and smoked, struggling against the damp. "Here," Jace said, handing her a relatively dry blanket he'd salvaged. "You're shivering." She hadn't realized she was until he mentioned it. The blanket smelled like herbs and wood smoke, familiar scents made strange by the context of someone else offering comfort. She pulled it around her shoulders, acutely aware of him standing close in the small, dry space they'd managed to preserve. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded, then set about coaxing the fire back to life. She watched his hands work, confident, capable despite his injury. Everything about him spoke of competence, of someone used to taking care of himself and others. It made his presence both comforting and unsettling. "Got it," he said as flames finally caught, "though we'll need to sit close to feel much warmth." They arranged themselves on the floor near the hearth, backs against the wall, shoulders almost touching. The rain continued its assault on the roof, but here by the fire, a small bubble of warmth held the damp at bay. "This wasn't how I pictured the evening going," Nora said. "Could be worse. Least we're dry, mostly." Optimist. Realist. "I've weathered storms in worse places. This is practically luxury." She glanced at him sideways. "You've lived rough." "Some." He stared into the fire. "Army for a while, after the war. Then cattle drives, mining camps, wherever work took me. Never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home." "By choice?" He was quiet for a moment. "Started that way. Then it became habit. Easier to leave than to risk staying." The words resonated more than she cared to admit. "I understand that." "Do you?" He turned to look at her, those gray eyes seeing too much. "How long have you been here?" 7 years. "That's a long time to be alone." "It's a long time to be safe," she corrected. He studied her face in the firelight. "What happened?" "That's against the rules. Remember? No questions about before." "You're right. I'm sorry." But something in his quiet acceptance, the way he didn't press or pry, made the words tumble out anyway. "I had a son, Charlie. He was 3 when—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "There was a fire. Someone didn't like that I'd refused their advances. Decided to teach me a lesson. Charlie didn't make it out." Jace's inhale was sharp. "Jesus, Nora, don't." She pulled the blanket tighter. "I don't want pity. I've had enough of that to last a lifetime. Wasn't offering pity." His voice was rough. "Just understanding. Maybe the weight of carrying someone's ghost." She looked at him then, really looked, saw the shadows in his eyes, the burden he carried as surely as she carried hers. "Your brother." It wasn't a question. He nodded slowly. "Eddie, 3 years younger than me. We were in Tucson, got caught up in a dispute that wasn't ours. Dark alley, too much whiskey. Someone pulled a gun." He scrubbed a hand over his face. "I drew faster, always was faster. But in the dark, the confusion, I didn't know it was Eddie until he fell. It was an accident. Doesn't matter. He's still dead. I still pulled the trigger." He leaned his head back against the wall. "Dwight, the one hunting me, he was Eddie's friend. Blames me for it. Can't say he's wrong." They sat in silence, listening to the rain and the pop of the fire. Two people marked by tragedy, finding unexpected shelter and shared understanding. "Is that why you saved me?" Jace asked eventually. "Because you know what it's like to need saving?" Nora considered the question. Maybe, or maybe I'm just foolish enough to believe people deserve second chances. Even people like us. Especially people like us. His hand moved slightly, coming to rest near hers on the floor between them. Not touching. He'd kept his promise about that, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. She didn't pull away. "The rain's stopping," he observed. "So it is." Neither of them moved. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, long and mournful. But here, in this damaged cabin with water still dripping through the roof, something like peace settled over them. "I'll help you fix it," Jay said. "The roof. Before I go. Before I go." The words sat heavy between them. A reminder of the temporary nature of this, whatever this was. Nora nodded, not trusting her voice. "That would be practical," she managed finally. "Practical," he agreed, and she heard the smile in his voice. "That's us. Entirely practical." She did smile then. Couldn't help it. "Shut up and tend the fire. It's going to be a long night." He chuckled and reached for another log. As he fed the flames, his fingers brushed hers. Accidentally, just the briefest contact, but she felt it like lightning, electric and dangerous and alive. She didn't pull away. Morning came harsh and bright, the desert sun already baking the wet earth into cracked patterns. Nora woke stiff from sleeping propped against the wall. The blanket still around her shoulders and Jace's warmth still beside her. Sometime in the night, exhaustion had claimed them both where they sat. She shifted carefully, not wanting to wake him, but his eyes opened immediately, alert, wary, then softening when he saw her. "Morning," he said, voice rough with sleep. "Morning." She stood quickly, needing distance, needing to restore the boundaries that had blurred in the firelight. "I'll make coffee." But the easy companionship of the night before lingered like smoke in the air. As she prepared breakfast, she was acutely aware of him moving around the cabin, assessing the water damage in daylight. The hole in the roof gaped like an accusation, reminding her of all the ways her carefully constructed life was falling apart. "I'll need to go to town," she said, not looking at him, "for supplies to fix this." "When?" "Today. The damage will only get worse if we wait. He said the word quietly, testing its weight. "Let me come with you." "Jace, hear me out." He moved closer, though still maintaining that careful distance between them. "You said it yourself. The townsfolk already talk. What's one more thing for them to gossip about? And if Dwight's men are around, you shouldn't go alone. I've been going alone for 7 years. That was before you dragged a gunshot stranger into your home. Like it or not, that changed things." She wanted to argue, but he was right. Her actions had already broken the seal on her isolation. What was one more crack in the foundation? "Fine," she said, "but you follow my lead in town. No talking unless necessary." "Yes, ma'am." They set out an hour later. Jace wearing his cleaned shirt and moving with only a slight stiffness to betray his healing injury. Nora had traded her everyday dress for her town clothes. Severe black that made her look older, more respectable, armor against the stares and whispers. The walk down to Dust Rock was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. As they neared the outskirts, Nora felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Town meant eyes watching, tongues wagging. Judgment passed in glances and turned backs. "Stay close," she murmured as they entered the main street. The reaction was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Women pulled their children closer. Men's hands drifted toward their guns, though none drew. All eyes tracked their progress down the dusty street. "Popular woman," Jace said under his breath. "Quiet." The general store sat halfway down the main street. Its proprietor, Mr. Hutchins, a weasel-faced man who'd never met a prophet he didn't like or a piece of gossip he wouldn't spread. He looked up as they entered, his eyes widening with barely concealed delight at this new development. "Miss Blackwood," he said, his tone oily with false politeness. "And a companion. How unexpected." "Mr. Hutchins. She kept her voice level, businesslike. I need roofing supplies, tar paper, nails, boards. The rain caused damage? Of course. But his eyes never left Jace, cataloging every detail for later retelling. And who might your friend be? Someone helping with repairs, she said curtly. The supplies, please. Hutchins moved to gather what she needed, but slowly, drawing out the process. Other customers entered the store, took one look at Nora and Jace, and suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere. The scrutiny was suffocating. Heard tell there was a shooting out past Miller's Creek last week, Hutchins said conversationally as he measured nails. Man killed. Horse too. Sheriff's been asking around. Nora felt Jace tense beside her, but kept her own expression neutral. How unfortunate. The supplies. Mr. Hutchins. Yes. Just making conversation. He named an exorbitant price, nearly double what the supplies were worth. That's robbery, Jace said, speaking for the first time. Hutchins's smile was sharp. That's business. Stranger, take it or leave it. Nora placed the money on the counter before Jace could respond. We'll take it. They gathered the supplies and left, but not before Hutchins called after them. You be careful up on that hill, Miss Blackwood. All sorts of dangerous folk around these days. Outside, Jace was rigid with anger. You let him rob you. I let him think he won, she corrected. There's a difference, and now we leave before, well. The witch has found herself a man. The voice came from behind them, slurred with mid-morning drink. They turned to find 3 men lounging against the saloon wall. Nora recognized them, Frank Morrison and his cousins. Troublemakers who spent more time drinking than working. Gentlemen, she said coolly, moving to step around them. Frank blocked their path, his bloodshot eyes roving over her with an ugliness that made her skin crawl. Not very neighborly, rushing off. Why don't you introduce us to your friend? Move aside. Frank, or what? You'll curse us? He laughed, an unpleasant sound. Maybe that's what happened to him. You put a spell on the poor bastard, made him think you're something worth looking at. Jace shifted slightly, and Nora put a warning hand on his arm. The first time she'd voluntarily touched him. His muscles were coiled tight beneath her fingers. We're leaving, she said firmly. Don't think so. Frank's cousin, Dale, moved to flank them. See, we're curious about what kind of man takes up with a woman like you. Must be something wrong with him. Nothing wrong with him, the third man said with a leer. Just knows a desperate woman when he sees one. Bet she's grateful for any attention, even from a stranger. Jace moved so fast Nora barely saw it. One moment he was beside her. The next, Frank was on the ground, blood streaming from his nose. Dale went for his gun, but found himself staring down the barrel of Jace's Colt. Touch that iron and I'll put a hole in you, Jace said, his voice deadly calm. Same goes for your friend there. The street had gone silent. People watched from doorways and windows, waiting to see blood spilled. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. You made a mistake, stranger. Frank wheezed from the ground. This ain't your town. No, Jace agreed. But she's under my protection. Anyone has a problem with her. They have a problem with me. Spread the word. He holstered his gun with deliberate slowness, then gathered the supplies they'd dropped. Ma'am, he said to Nora, offering his arm as if they were simply out for a stroll. She took it, chin high, and they walked away. Behind them, Frank spat blood into the dust and yelled, This ain't over! You hear me? This ain't over! They maintained their composure until they were out of sight of town. Then Nora yanked her arm free and whirled on him. What were you thinking? Do you have any idea what you've just done? Defended you, something someone should have done long ago. I don't need defending. I've survived 7 years without a white knight riding to my rescue. And how's that worked out? Living alone, letting them treat you like dirt, paying double for supplies. His eyes blazed with anger, but not at her. You deserve better. Deserve? She laughed bitterly. What I deserve doesn't matter. What matters is surviving. And you've just painted a target on both our backs. The target was already there. At least now they know there's someone willing to shoot back. They glared at each other, breathing hard, the sun beating down mercilessly. Then Nora saw it. Movement on the ridge above town. Riders. Moving with purpose. "Get down," she hissed, pulling him behind a cluster of rocks. They crouched together, watching as 4 riders descended toward Dust Rock. Even from a distance, she could see the deliberate way they moved, the careful spacing that spoke of men used to violence. "Dwight," Jace said grimly. "The one in the black hat. The others are his hired guns. They're heading for town. They'll ask questions, and Hutchins will be happy to answer." He met her eyes. "I'm sorry. I've brought this to your door." "No." The word came out fierce. "I brought it to my own door the night I saved you, but we need to move. Now." They took a circuitous route back to the cabin, staying off the main trail, moving through arroyos and behind ridges. By the time they reached the hillside, both were exhausted and coated in dust. "Pack what you can carry," Nora said as soon as they were inside. "Food, water, ammunition. We can't stay here." "Nora." "They'll come looking. Maybe not today, but soon. And when they do..." She stopped, overwhelmed by the reality of leaving the only home she'd known for 7 years. "This is my fault," Jay said quietly. "I'll lead them away. You can..." "What? Go back to town? After what just happened?" She shook her head. "That bridge is well and truly burned now." "Then where?" She moved to the loose floorboard in the corner, prying it up to reveal a small cache, money, a few pieces of jewelry, documents wrapped in oilcloth. "There's an old mining camp in the mountains, abandoned, but the buildings are still solid. We can hide there until..." "Until what?" "Until I figure out how to live in a world where I'm not alone anymore." She thought but didn't say. "Pack," she repeated instead. "We leave at nightfall." As Jace gathered supplies, Nora stood in the doorway of her cabin, looking at the life she'd built from ashes and solitude, the herbs hanging from the rafters, the carefully organized shelves, the bed where she'd slept alone for so many years, and where Jace had lain while she tended him. She'd thought she was protecting herself by staying isolated, but walls built to keep pain out also kept life from getting in. Now those walls were crumbling, and she didn't know whether to mourn their loss or celebrate her freedom. "Ready?" Jace asked, coming to stand beside her. "No," she said honestly. "But that doesn't matter anymore." "Does it?" He surprised her by taking her hand, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. "For what it's worth, I think you're the bravest woman I've ever met." Brave or foolish? Sometimes they're the same thing. As shadows lengthened across the desert, they loaded what they could onto her old mule and prepared to disappear into the wilderness. Behind them, Dust Rock settled into evening, unaware that the witch they'd scorned was about to vanish entirely, and that, in trying to destroy her, they'd only set her free. The abandoned mining camp clung to the mountainside like a collection of broken teeth. Weathered buildings half collapsed under the weight of years and neglect. They reached it just before dawn, exhausted from the night's hard travel through rough terrain. The mule picked its way carefully among the scattered debris of a dream that had died when the silver ran out. "Home sweet home," Jace said dryly, surveying the desolation. Nora was too tired to respond. She'd barely slept in 3 days, between the confrontation in town, the frantic packing, and the grueling journey. Every shadow had been a potential threat, every sound a possible pursuer. Now, looking at the ramshackle buildings, she wondered if they'd traded one prison for another. They chose the most intact structure, a 2-room shack that had probably housed a foreman once. The roof was mostly solid, the walls still standing. Jace checked for rattlesnakes and scorpions while Nora unpacked their meager supplies. "We'll need water," she said, her voice hoarse from the dust. "Saw a stream on the way up. I'll go." "Together," she said. "We stay together now." He nodded, understanding the new reality. They were fugitives now, both of them. The luxury of solitude was one more thing left behind in Dust Rock. The stream was a miracle of clear mountain water, cold enough to make their teeth ache. They drank deeply, filled their containers, and Nora couldn't resist splashing her face in arms, washing away the grime of travel. "You've got—" Jace gestured to her cheek, where dust had mixed with sweat to form muddy streaks. She scrubbed at it ineffectually, and he surprised her by pulling out his bandana, dipping it in the stream. "May I?" After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. He cleaned her face with gentle strokes, his touch careful and oddly intimate. She found herself studying the lines around his eyes, the way the morning light caught in his hair. "There," he said softly. "Better." They were standing too close. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the pulse beating in his throat. For a moment, the world narrowed to just this. Two people finding unexpected tenderness in the midst of chaos. A sound in the brush broke the spell. Both whirled, hands going to weapons, but it was only a deer picking its way to the water. They shared a shaky laugh. "We're jumpy as cats," Nora said. "With good reason. Come on, let's get back." They spent the day making the shack livable, cleaning years of dust and animal droppings, patching the worst gaps in the walls, creating something like comfort from nothing. It was hard work, but it kept them busy, kept them from thinking too hard about what came next. As evening approached, they sat outside on a flat rock, sharing dried meat and hard biscuits, watching the sun paint the valley below in shades of gold and crimson. "It's beautiful up here," Nora said quietly. "Different from your hillside. Everything's different now." She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself smaller. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and be back in my cabin, alone, that this is all some fever dream. Is that what you want, to wake up?" She considered the question. "I don't know anymore. For 7 years, I knew exactly who I was, what my life would be. Now you're free. Am I? We're hiding in a mining camp, running from men who want you dead and a town that wants me burned. That doesn't feel much like freedom." He shifted closer, not quite touching, but near enough that she could feel his presence like a physical thing. "Freedom isn't about where you are. It's about choosing who you're with." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither quite dared to acknowledge. Nora found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by something stronger than caution. "Jace," she whispered. "I know," he said. "I promised. No touching. That was before he'd defended her, before they'd run together, before she'd started to forget why she'd built those walls in the first place." He turned to look at her fully, those gray eyes dark with something that made her breath catch. "What are you saying?" Instead of answering, she reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away. Her fingers touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw, the rough texture of stubble. He closed his eyes, leaning into the touch like a man starved for gentleness. "Nora," he said, her name a prayer and a warning all at once. "I'm tired of being afraid," she whispered, "tired of being alone." He caught her hand, pressed his lips to her palm. The gesture was tender, reverent, and it broke something open inside her. When he drew her closer, she went willingly, all her careful rules crumbling like ancient parchment. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant, as if both were afraid the other might vanish. Then hunger took over, 7 years of isolation meeting 3 years of running, loneliness recognizing its match. She gripped his shirt, anchoring herself as the world spun. His arms came around her, strong and sure, holding her like she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Nora touched her lips, dazed by the intensity of what had just happened. She started, but he pressed a finger gently to her lips. "Don't apologize, please. I wasn't going to—" She managed a shaky smile. "I was going to say we should go inside. It's getting dark." They made their way back to the shack in charged silence. Inside, with only one bedroll between them and the night pressing close. The air felt electric with possibility and danger. "I can sleep outside," Jace offered, though his voice suggested it was the last thing he wanted. "No." She spread the bedroll and sat down. patting the space beside her. "We stay together. Remember?" He sat carefully, maintaining a small distance between them. But as the temperature dropped and the mountain cold seeped through the walls, they gradually moved closer, seeking warmth. Nora found herself curled against his side, his arm around her, feeling safer than she had in years despite their precarious situation. "Tell me about before," she said into the darkness. "Before your brother, when things were good." So he did. He talked about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about learning to break horses with his father, about his mother's cornbread and Eddie's terrible singing. His voice was warm with memory, painting pictures of a life that seemed impossibly distant from where they were now. "What about you?" he asked when his stories ran dry. "Before Charlie, before everything." She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, haltingly, she began to speak, about growing up in Missouri, daughter of the town healer, about learning herbs and remedies at her mother's knee, about meeting Thomas when she was 17, marrying him despite her parents' reservations, following him west with dreams of a new life. "He wasn't a bad man," she said carefully. "Just weak. When the farm failed, he started drinking. When the drinking got bad, he started gambling, lost everything we had, including his life in a card game gone wrong. I was 21, widowed and pregnant in a town that had no use for either." Jace's arm tightened around her. "But you survived." "I did what I had to. Took in washing, mending, used what my mother taught me to help with birthings and sickness. Raised Charlie best I could." Her voice caught. He had the sweetest laugh. Could find joy in anything. A butterfly, a pretty rock, the way soap bubbles caught the light. "He sounds wonderful." He was, and that made it worse. Somehow, when Jacob Marsh started coming around, offering to help, to court me proper, I should have seen the darkness in him, but I was tired, and Charlie needed a father, and I thought. She trailed off. "You thought you were doing the right thing." I told myself that, right up until I said no to his proposal and he decided if he couldn't have me, no one could. The words came out flat, drained of emotion by too many retellings in her own mind. "Set fire to the house while we slept. I got out. Charlie didn't. Jacob left town before the ashes cooled, and I ran, kept running until I found that hillside and decided I was done with people altogether." They lay in silence. Two souls laid bare in the darkness. Outside, an owl called, long and mournful. The sound seemed to release something in the air between them. "We're a pair, aren't we?" Jace said finally, both trying to outrun ghosts. "Maybe that's why—" She stopped, unsure how to finish. "Why what?" "Why I couldn't leave you that night. Why you couldn't leave me in town. Broken recognizes broken." He shifted, turning so he could see her face in the dim moonlight filtering through the gaps in the wall. "You're not broken, Nora. Bent, maybe. Scarred, definitely. But not broken. Broken things can't heal others the way you do. I couldn't heal Charlie. Couldn't heal myself. You healed me." He touched her face gently. "Not just the wounds. The other thing. The emptiness. First time in 3 years I don't feel like I'm drowning." She turned her face into his touch, pressing a kiss to his palm as he'd done to hers. "What happens when they find us?" "Then we face it together. No more running alone. Promise?" "Promise." They sealed it with another kiss, deeper this time, full of promise and need. When exhaustion finally claimed them, they slept entwined. Two refugees from sorrow finding shelter in each other's arms. But morning came too soon, and with it, the sound of horses on the trail below. Jace was instantly awake, moving to the window with his gun drawn. Nora joined him, peering through a crack in the boards. 4 riders, moving slowly, checking the ground for signs. Even from a distance, she could see the deliberate way they searched, the patience of experienced hunters. "Dwight!" Jace confirmed grimly. "They're tracking us." "How long before they find this place?" "Hours, maybe. Depends on how good their tracker is." He turned to her, face set with determination. "You need to go. Take the mule. Head deeper into the mountains. There's settlements on the other side. Places you can disappear. We go together or not at all. Nora. No. Her voice was steel. I've done my running alone. Whatever comes, we face it as we are, together. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Together, then, let's make ready. They had chosen their stand. Now all that remained was to see if love could survive what violence would bring. They moved deeper into the mountains, using every trick Jace knew to obscure their trail. But Dwight's tracker was good. Too good. By afternoon, the pursuing riders were close enough that they could hear the horses' hooves echoing off the canyon walls. Here, Jace said, guiding them into a narrow defile between two massive rock formations. Natural bottleneck. They'll have to come at a single file. Nora checked the rifle he'd taught her to use during their flight. Her hands were steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. How many bullets do we have? Not enough. His face was grim. But we'll make them count. They positioned themselves behind a fallen boulder, commanding a clear view of the approach. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, turning their hiding spot into an oven. Sweat trickled down Nora's back, but she didn't move, didn't complain. Whatever happens, Jace said quietly. I want you to know. Save it, she interrupted. Tell me after. He almost smiled. Stubborn woman. You knew what you were getting into. The sound of horses grew closer, then voices carried on the still air. They came this way. Mr. Morrison, tracks are fresh. Good. Dwight's voice, cold as winter. I want Calder alive if possible. Got 3 years of payback to deliver before I put him down. What about the woman? Don't much care, long as she's not shooting at us. Nora's jaw tightened. Beside her, Jace checked his Colt one more time. The first rider appeared around the bend, the tracker, eyes fixed on the ground. Jace let him come closer. Closer, then fired. The man tumbled from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. Not a killing shot, but enough to take him out of the fight. All hell broke loose. The remaining 3 riders scattered, finding cover among the rocks. Gunfire erupted, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Nora fired when she had clear shots, trying to make each bullet count. Rock chips flew as return fire sought their position. Moving left, one of the gunmen called out. Jace tracked the movement, waited for his moment. When the man broke cover to advance, Jace's shot caught him center mass. He went down hard and didn't get up. That's 2, Nora breathed. But Dwight and his remaining man were smarter, more patient. They kept up steady fire, pinning Nora and Jace down while working to flank their position. They're trying to get above us. Jace muttered. He looked at Nora, made a decision. Cover me! Before she could protest, he was moving, darting from rock to rock, drawing fire. Nora shot at muzzle flashes, trying to give him the seconds he needed. Her rifle clicked empty. She grabbed Jace's spare pistol, kept firing. A cry of pain, the third gunman was down, clutching his leg. That left only Dwight. Just you and me now. Calder, Dwight called out. Like it should have been from the start. It doesn't have to be this way, Jace responded, working his way to a better position. Eddie's death was an accident. You know that. Accident? Dwight's laugh was bitter. You always were faster. Always had to prove it. Well, you proved it that night, didn't you? I loved him like my own brother. Then you should have died instead of him. Dwight broke cover, firing rapidly. Jace dove aside, but not fast enough. Nora saw him spin and fall, blood blooming on his side. No! The word tore from her throat. She moved without thinking, racing across open ground toward Jace. Dwight's gun swung toward her. Time slowed. She saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw death coming for her as it had come for Charlie. The shot was impossibly loud, but it was Dwight who staggered, looking down in surprise at the red spreading across his chest. Behind him, Jace lowered his smoking Colt, his face pale but his hand steady. Dwight fell to his knees, then forward. He managed one word before the light left his eyes. Eddie. Then silence, broken only by Nora's ragged breathing as she reached Jace. You fool, she said, dropping beside him, hands already assessing the wound. You damn fool. Nice to see you too, he managed, wincing as she pressed fabric against the bullet hole. How bad? Bad enough. The bullet had caught him just below the ribs, and blood was flowing too fast, too freely. We need to get you somewhere I can work properly. The shack. Too far. You'll bleed out. She looked around desperately, spotted a shallow cave in the rock face. There. Can you walk? He nodded, though she could see the effort it cost him. Together they stumbled to the cave, Nora supporting most of his weight. Inside. She laid him down as gently as possible and opened her herb pouch with shaking hands. This is going to hurt, she warned, packing the wound with moss and medicinal herbs. Can't hurt worse than... He cut off with a groan as she worked. Don't you dare die on me. Jace called her, she said fiercely, binding the poultice in place. Not after everything. You promised we'd face things together. Bossy, he mumbled, eyes drifting closed. Jace, she gripped his face. Look at me. Stay with me. His eyes opened with effort. Not going anywhere. You're stuck with me. Witch woman. She laughed, or maybe sobbed. She wasn't sure which. Good, because I've gotten used to having you around. The next hours were a battle she fought with all her knowledge and determination. The bleeding slowed, but wouldn't stop entirely. His skin grew cold and clammy despite the heat. She kept him talking when he was conscious, telling him stories about anything and everything, her mother's remedies, Charlie's first steps, the way sage bloomed after rain. Night fell. She built a small fire at the cave mouth, knowing it might draw attention but needing the light to work by. In the flickering shadows, Jace's face looked carved from stone. Nora, he said during one of his lucid moments. Earlier, when I tried to tell you, I said save it, in case I don't get another chance. You will. She gripped his hand hard. You will get another chance because I forbid you to die. Do you hear me? He squeezed back weakly. Yes, ma'am, but just so you know, I love you. The words hung in the air like a blessing. She pressed his hand to her cheek, not caring that it was stained with blood and dirt. I love you too, she whispered, which is why you have to live. I can't do this alone anymore. I won't. He managed a ghost of a smile. Then I guess I'd better live. Through the long night, she tended him, changed dressings, forced water and herbal teas between his lips, kept the fever at bay through sheer force of will. When he shivered, she lay beside him, sharing her warmth. When he burned, she bathed his face with precious water. Dawn came like a miracle, painting the cave walls gold. Jace's breathing was easier, his color better. The bleeding had finally stopped. You did it, he said wonderingly, looking at her exhausted face. We did it, she corrected. You're too stubborn to die, and I'm too stubborn to let you. Good match, then. The best. By the second day, he could sit up. By the third, stand with help. They made their slow way back to the mining camp, Nora supporting him every step. The bodies they left for the buzzards, harsh, perhaps. But the desert had its own justice. They stayed in the mountains another week while Jace healed. It was a strange time, suspended between danger and peace. They talked about everything and nothing, made love with desperate tenderness, planned a future neither quite dared believe in. Colorado, Jace said one evening as they watched the stars. There's a town there, Clearwater, good people, far enough from here that our ghosts won't follow. And what would we do in this Clearwater? Whatever we want. I could find work, carpentry, maybe, or breaking horses. You could be a proper healer, help people without fear. A proper healer, she repeated, tasting the words. With a proper husband? He turned to look at her. If you'll have me, we could find a preacher in the next town, make it official. Jace called her. Was that a proposal? The worst one in history. Probably. I've got nothing to offer but a scarred-up body and more baggage than a freight train. She kissed him soundly. You've got yourself. That's more than enough. Is that a yes? That's a yes. They left the mountains on a clear morning, the mule packed with what little they had left, at the valley floor. They paused to look back at Dust Rock in the distance, that small, bitter town that had brought them together through its very cruelty. "Any regrets?" Jace asked. "None," Nora said firmly. "It was never home, just a place to hide. And now," she looked at him, this man who'd literally taken bullets for her, who'd seen her at her worst and somehow found something worth loving. "Now I don't need to hide anymore." They turned their backs on the past and headed north, toward Colorado and whatever future they could build together. Behind them, the desert reclaimed its own, covering tracks and erasing signs of their passage. In Dust Rock, people would whisper about the witch who'd vanished into thin air, taking her mysterious stranger with her. Some would say she'd cursed the town with her leaving. Others would claim they'd seen her flying through the night sky. But Nora and Jace knew the truth. Sometimes the only magic needed was two broken people choosing to heal together, and the only curse worth fearing was a life spent alone. They'd paid in blood and tears for their freedom, and now they would claim it. 1 mile, 1 day, one shared sunrise at a time. The journey back to Nora's cabin took 3 days, with Jace leaning heavily on her for support. Each step was agony for him, though he tried to hide it. The wound had reopened during their descent from the mountains, and fresh blood seeped through the bandages despite her careful tending. "Just a little further," she murmured as they crested the final ridge. Below them lay her homestead, looking smaller and more desolate than she remembered. The damaged roof gaped like an accusation, reminding her of that night when everything had changed. The cabin door stood open, swinging in the breeze. Her heart sank. They'd been here, Dwight's men or perhaps others from town, looking for the witch and her stranger. Inside was chaos. Her carefully organized herbs had been swept from the shelves, jars shattered on the floor. The bed was overturned, her few possessions scattered and broken. 7 years of careful life, destroyed in minutes. "I'm sorry," Jace said, sagging against the doorframe. "Don't." She guided him to the overturned bed, righting it with effort. "This was never about my cabin. Lie down before you fall down." He collapsed onto the straw mattress, face gray with pain and exhaustion. Fresh blood had soaked through the makeshift bandages, and his skin burned with fever. She'd done what she could in the cave, but he needed proper care. Clean water, rest, things she couldn't provide while running. She worked mechanically, clearing enough space to move, gathering what supplies remained intact. Her hands shook as she boiled water, prepared fresh poultices. The wound was worse than she'd let him know, angry and inflamed. Infection setting in despite her efforts. "Nora," his voice was weak, eyes glazed with fever. "You need to go. Find help. I'm not leaving you. Town's not far. Maybe someone—" "No one in Dust Rock will help us. You know that." She bathed his face with cool water, felt the heat radiating from his skin. The herbs she needed were scattered, some ruined entirely. She gathered what she could, brewing a tea that might bring down the fever, but it felt like trying to bail out a sinking boat with a thimble. Night fell, and with it came delirium. Jace thrashed on the narrow bed, calling out for Eddie, for his mother, for people long dead. Nora held him down when he tried to rise, whispered soothing words that seemed to calm him momentarily before the fever swept him away again. "Don't leave me." She found herself praying to a God she'd stopped believing in the night Charlie died. "Not him too. Please, not him too." By dawn, Jace was barely conscious. His breathing came in short, labored gasps, and the wound had taken on an ominous color. She'd seen enough death to recognize its approach, and desperation clawed at her throat. A sound outside made her reach for the rifle, but it was only Samuel the goat, returned from wherever he'd wandered. Behind him, impossibly, came a figure she recognized. Millie, the young woman from town whose fever she'd broken 2 winters past. "Miss Nora?" Millie approached cautiously, carrying a basket. "I heard what happened in town. Came to see if— Lord have mercy, is that him?" "He's dying," Nora said, too exhausted for anything but truth. "The wound's gone bad, and I don't have what I need to. I brought supplies." Millie set down her basket, revealing clean bandages, a bottle of alcohol, and most precious of all, a packet of medicinal herbs from the doctor's store. "Stole them," she added with a defiant lift of her chin. "Figured I owed you that much and more. Millie, if they find out, then they find out. You saved my life when everyone else had given up. Least I can do is try to return the favor." Together they worked over Jace, cleaning the wound properly, applying fresh medicines. Millie proved surprisingly competent, following Nora's instructions without squeamishness. The sun climbed higher as they fought their battle against death. Two women united in determination. "There," Nora said finally, sitting back on her heels. The wound was clean, properly dressed, the fever beginning to break under the assault of willow bark tea and prayer. "Now we wait." "He's handsome," Millie observed, studying Jace's sleeping face. "Worth all this trouble?" "Yes," the answer came without hesitation. "He's worth everything." Millie smiled sadly. "Must be nice, having someone feel that way about you. Having someone to feel that way about. You're young still. You'll find—" "In Dust Rock?" Millie laughed bitterly. "Only men they're worth having are already married or too scared of their own shadows to court the girl who associates with the witch. I'm sorry. I never meant for my reputation to—" "Don't apologize. You showed me there's more to life than what small minds think." She stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "I should go before I missed. But Miss Nora, there's something you should know." "What?" "Sheriff's forming a posse. Says you and your man killed those fellows in cold blood. That you used witchcraft to bewitch him into doing your evil bidding." She rolled her eyes at the absurdity. "Load of nonsense, but people are scared and angry. They're coming." Nora's blood ran cold. "When?" "Tomorrow. Maybe day after. Sheriff wants to do it all legal-like. Get a warrant from the circuit judge." Millie gathered her basket. "You could run. Head north like you planned. He can't travel. Not yet. Then what will you do?" Nora looked at Jace, still lost in fevered dreams but breathing easier now. Then she gazed around the cabin, broken and ransacked but still standing. Still hers. "I'll do what I should have done 7 years ago," she said quietly. "I'll stop running." After Millie left, Nora set about preparing. She loaded the rifle, checked the ammunition, placed weapons within easy reach, but she also did something else. She began to tidy the cabin, setting it to rights as best she could. If they were coming for her, they'd find her in her own home, not cowering in the ruins of her life. Jace woke near sunset, lucid for the first time in days. "Nora?" "Here." She brought him water, helped him drink. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by horses." He looked around, noticed the preparations. "What's happening?" She told him about Millie's visit, the coming posse. His face darkened with each word. "We need to go. Now." "You can't ride. You can barely sit up." "I'll manage. Get the mule ready." "No." She sat beside him on the bed, took his hand. "No more running. This is my home, our home. If you'll have it, I won't let them drive me from it again." "Nora, they'll arrest you. Or worse. Maybe. Or maybe it's time someone stood up to their fear and ignorance." She squeezed his hand. "Either way, I'm done letting them dictate my life." He studied her face for a long moment. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." "Then we make our stand together." He struggled to sit up despite her protests. "Help me clean up. If we're receiving visitors, I'd rather not look like death warmed over." She laughed, despite everything. "Vain man." "You just want to look presentable when I defend my future wife's honor." They spent the evening in quiet preparation. Nora helped Jace wash and change into clean clothes, combed his hair, did the same for herself. She put on her best dress, not the severe black she wore to town, but a soft blue that had belonged to her mother. If this was to be their last night of freedom, she wanted to spend it as herself, not the witch they'd made her. "You're beautiful," Jace said softly, watching her braid her hair by lamplight. Flatterer, truth-teller. He patted the bed beside him. Come here. She curled against his good side, careful not to jostle the wound. They lay together in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the desert, coyotes calling, wind through sage, the eternal whisper of sand against stone. Whatever happens tomorrow, he began, will happen tomorrow. She finished, tonight, we're just Nora and Jace, not the witch and the gunslinger, just us. I like the sound of that. They talked quietly through the night, making plans they might never see fulfilled. A small farm in Colorado, chickens and goats and maybe a milk cow, a garden where she could grow healing herbs and vegetables both, children, God willing, little ones with his gray eyes and her stubborn chin. 2, Jace said firmly, boy and a girl. 3, she countered. 2 boys to help with the farm and a girl to learn the healing arts. Greedy woman. Practical woman. Farms need hands to work them. They were still debating baby names when dawn broke, spilling golden light across the desert. The morning was peaceful. Deceptively so. But by noon, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon, moving steadily closer. They're coming, Nora said unnecessarily. Jace checked his Colt one more time. We could still... No. She stood straight and tall, chin lifted. Whatever happens, we face it as we are, together. The posse consisted of 8 men, led by Sheriff Watson, a decent enough lawman who'd always treated her with wary respect, if not friendliness. She recognized most of the others, townsmen playing at being brave, clutching rifles like talismans against their fear. They stopped a prudent distance from the cabin. The sheriff dismounted, approaching slowly with hands visible. Miss Blackwood, he called. Jace Calder, I'm here to arrest you both for the murders of Dwight Morrison and 3 other men. Come out peaceable, and no one needs to get hurt. Nora stepped onto the porch. Jace beside her, despite her attempts to keep him inside. He stood straight through sheer will, one hand resting on his gun butt. Those men came hunting us. Sheriff, Nora said clearly. We defended ourselves, nothing more. That's for a judge to decide, ma'am, not me. Since when does Dustrock care about judges and law? Jace asked. Or is that just when it's convenient? The sheriff's jaw tightened. I'm trying to do this right. Calder, don't make it harder than it needs to be. The way you did things right when Frank Morrison and his boys were harassing Miss Blackwood in town? Where was the law then? Murmurs ran through the posse. Some of the men shifted uneasily in their saddles. That's different, the sheriff began. No, Nora interrupted. It's not. She stepped forward, addressing not just Watson, but all of them. For 7 years, I've lived on this hillside, keeping to myself, harming no one. I've healed your sick when the doctor was too drunk or too far away, delivered your babies, eased your elders' passing, and in return, you've called me witch, shunned me, made my life a misery of isolation. Now, see here, one of the townsmen started. I'm not finished, she said sharply. You came to me in the dark when you needed help, then cursed me in daylight. You let men like Frank Morrison threaten and abuse me because it was easier than standing up for what's right. And now you come here with guns and righteous anger because I dared to survive? Because I found someone who sees me as human? The silence stretched taut. Some of the men wouldn't meet her eyes. Finally, Sheriff Watson spoke. That may all be true, Miss Blackwood. But the law should protect everyone, Jace said. Not just those deemed acceptable. We killed in self-defense. Sheriff. Nothing more, nothing less. Watson looked between them, clearly torn. He was a good man, trying to do right in a situation with no easy answers. Then another voice spoke from the back of the group. Let them be. Everyone turned. It was Doc Morrison, no relation to Dwight, despite the name. He urged his horse forward, looking older and more tired than Nora had ever seen him. Doc, the sheriff said, surprised. Girl's right, the doctor said gruffly. We've treated her shamefully, all of us, and now we want to compound that shame with more injustice. He looked directly at Nora. I'm sorry, for all of it. Should have said so years ago. Doc Morrison, someone protested. "Shut up, Carl," the doctor snapped. "You were happy enough when she saved your boy from that fever last winter. Now you want to arrest her for surviving?" He turned his horse around. "I'll have no part in this. Neither should any of you." He rode away without looking back. After a moment's hesitation, 2 others followed, then another. Sheriff Watson watched his posse dissolve with something like relief. When only 3 men remained, the hard cases who'd never met a fight they didn't like, he made his decision. "Appears I lack the manpower to make arrests today," he said formally. "Suggest you folks make yourselves scarce for a while. Month or 2, maybe. Let tempers cool." "Sheriff," one of the remaining men protested. "That's my decision. Jake, don't like it. Find another town." Watson mounted his horse, tipped his hat to Nora. "Ma'am," Calder. "Good day to you." They watched the remnants of the posse ride away, dust settling in their wake. When they were gone, Nora's knees nearly buckled with relief. Jace caught her, holding her steady despite his own weakness. "It's over," she breathed. "For now," he agreed. "But the sheriff's right. We should leave for a while. Let things settle." She nodded, leaning into his strength. "Colorado?" "Colorado." They stood together on the porch, looking out at the desert that had been her refuge and prison both. Soon they would pack what little remained and head north to that new life they'd dreamed of. There would be challenges, certainly. 2 damaged souls didn't heal overnight, and the world was rarely kind to those who lived outside its narrow boundaries. But for now, for this moment, they had won something precious, the right to choose their own path, together. It was more than either had dared hope for, and it was enough. The road to Colorado stretched before them like a promise, winding through high desert and mountain passes toward a future neither quite dared to fully believe in. They'd left Dust Rock 2 weeks past, traveling slowly to accommodate Jace's healing wound and the old mule's stubborn pace. Each mile took them further from their ghosts, though Nora knew well that some specters traveled in the heart rather than the land. They stopped in the town of Cedar Ridge to be married, finding a circuit preacher who asked no questions about their past. The ceremony was simple. Just them, the preacher, and his wife as witness in a small chapel that smelled of pine and beeswax candles. Nora wore her mother's blue dress. Jace had found a string tie somewhere that made him look almost respectable, despite the healing scar on his temple. "Do you, Jace William Calder, take this woman to be your lawful wedded wife?" the preacher intoned. "I do," Jace said, his gray eyes never leaving hers. "And do you, Nora Rose Blackwood, take this man to be your lawful wedded husband?" "I do," she whispered, feeling the words remake her world. When Jace kissed her, gentle and reverent, she tasted their whole future on his lips, mornings waking in his arms, evenings by their own hearth, the family they would build from love instead of loss. That night, in a boarding house room with clean sheets and a view of the mountains, they came together as husband and wife. There was nothing hurried or desperate about it now, just the slow, sweet exploration of 2 people who had chosen each other against all odds. "My wife," Jace murmured against her neck, like he was testing the words. "My husband?" she replied, threading her fingers through his hair. They stayed in Cedar Ridge 3 days, long enough for Jace to send word to a cousin in Clearwater about work and lodging. The response came quicker than expected. Enthusiastic welcome and news of a small farmstead for rent just outside town. It seemed their new life was eager to begin. The journey resumed, each day bringing new landscapes. The desert gave way to scrub pine, then true forest. Mountains rose around them, their peaks already touched with early autumn snow. Nora had never seen such country, and she found herself stopping often just to stare at the vastness of it all. "It's so green," she said one evening as they camped by a crystal-clear stream. "Wait until you see it in full summer," Jace said, cleaning fish for their supper. "Wildflowers thick as a carpet, aspens shimmering like gold coins. You've been here before?" "Passed through, years back. Always thought if I ever settled down, It'd be somewhere like this. He glanced at her, smiled. Never thought I'd have someone to settle with. 3 weeks into their journey, they encountered trouble one last time. Not Dwight's men or vengeful townspeople, but simple bandits who thought a lone couple made easy prey. They came at dusk, 3 rough men emerging from the trees with guns drawn. "Well, well," the leader drawled. "What have we here? Travelers with full packs and a nice mule. Reckon you folks can spare some charity for fellow wanderers." Nora felt Jace tense beside her, but his voice was calm. "We've got little enough, friend. Just what we need to start new somewhere." "That's touching," another bandit said. "Real touching. But we'll be the judge of what you need." They moved closer, and that's when they made their mistake. Focused on Jace as the obvious threat, they dismissed Nora entirely. She'd learned hard lessons about being underestimated. When the nearest bandit reached for their packs, she moved. The hidden knife slid from her sleeve into her hand, pressing against his throat before he could react. "Drop the guns," she said quietly. "All of you. Lady, you don't want to—" "I've killed before," she interrupted, and something in her voice must have convinced them. "This knife is very sharp, and my hand is very steady. Your friend will be bleeding out before any of you can draw. Choose." A tense moment passed. Then, one by one, guns hit the ground. "Smart men," Jace said, his own Colt now trained on them. "Now back away, slow and easy." The bandits retreated, hands raised. Their leader glared at Nora with something like respect. "That's a dangerous woman you got there, mister." "The best kind," Jace agreed. "Now get going before she decides to test that blade after all." They fled into the gathering darkness. Nora lowered the knife, her hand beginning to shake as the moment passed. "That was—" Jace started. "Necessary," she finished. "I told you, I'm done being afraid." He pulled her close, pressed a kiss to her temple. "Remind me never to get on your bad side, Mrs. Calder. Just don't give me cause, Mr. Calder." They reached Clearwater on a crisp October morning, the town spreading before them like a picture from a dream. It was larger than Dust Rock, but friendlier somehow, with tree-lined streets and houses that spoke of permanence and pride. People nodded pleasantly as they passed, curious but not hostile. Jace's cousin, Matthew, met them at the general store, a broad-shouldered man with Jace's gray eyes and an easy smile. "Jace, you old dog." He pulled Jace into a backslapping embrace, then turned to Nora with genuine warmth. "And you must be the woman who finally tamed this wanderer, Matthew Calder, ma'am. Welcome to the family." The farmstead he'd arranged was perfect, a small but solid house with good bones, 20 acres of workable land, established vegetable garden, and a barn that only needed minor repairs. It sat in a valley between 2 ridges, sheltered but not isolated, with the neighbors visible in the distance but not crowding close. "It's wonderful," Nora breathed, standing on the porch and surveying their new domain. "Needs work," Jace said, but she could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Everything worth having does." They spent the winter making it theirs. Jace repaired fences and reinforced the barn while his shoulder finished healing. Nora organized the house, planted herbs in the cold frame, learned the rhythms of their new home. Word spread quietly that she had healing knowledge, and soon people began coming to their door. A child with croup, a woman with difficult pregnancy, an old man with aching joints. She was careful at first, waiting to see how they'd receive her. But these people were different from Dust Rock's fearful citizens. They paid her with gratitude and fresh bread, invited her to quilting bees and church socials. When someone called her a healer, it was with respect, not suspicion. Spring came with a rush of green and the sound of Jace whistling as he worked the fields. Nora stood in her garden one morning, hands deep in the good earth, and realized she was happy. Truly, bone-deep happy in a way she'd forgotten was possible. "You're smiling," Jace observed, coming up behind her. "Am I not allowed?" "Smile all you want, just wondering what brought it on." She turned in his arms. not caring that she was covered in dirt. I was thinking about Charlie, how he would have loved this place. The chickens especially. He always wanted chickens. We could name one after him, Jay suggested gently. That red rooster, maybe? He's got spirit enough. Charlie the rooster. She laughed. And if there were tears mixed in, they were the healing kind. He would have thought that was hilarious. Summer brought their first harvest and news that changed everything. Nora was with child. She'd suspected for weeks but hadn't dared hope until the town doctor confirmed it. She told Jace by the stream where they liked to fish on lazy afternoons. He stared at her for a long moment, then whooped loud enough to scare every trout for miles. A baby, he said wonderingly, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. Our baby. Are you happy? Happy. He kissed her soundly. Woman. I'm so far past happy I don't have words for it. As autumn painted the aspens gold, Nora often found herself on the porch at sunset, watching Jace work while their child quickened within her. Sometimes she thought about the woman she'd been, alone on that hillside, convinced she'd never let anyone close again. That woman felt like a stranger now, or perhaps a ghost finally laid to rest. What are you thinking about? Jace asked one evening, settling beside her with 2 cups of tea. Time, she said. How a year ago I was certain I'd die alone, and now, she gestured at their life spread before them. Now you're stuck with a beat-up gunslinger and a baby on the way. Now I have everything I never dared dream of. She took his hand, placed it where the baby was doing somersaults. Do you ever think about them? Eddie and Charlie? Every day. His voice was quiet but not pained. But different now. Less like ghosts, more like guardian angels. Maybe. Watching over what we've built. I like that thought. As the first snow began to fall, dusting their valley in pristine white, they sat together in peaceful silence. Inside the house, soup simmered on the stove. In the barn, animals were secure and warm. Under her heart, new life grew strong and sure. No regrets? Jace asked, echoing his question from so long ago. None, Nora said firmly. Not one. In the distance, smoke rose from their neighbors' chimneys, and the lights of Clearwater Town twinkled like earthbound stars. Here was community without judgment, purpose without isolation, love without fear. They'd paid dearly for this peace, but that only made it more precious. I love you, Jay said suddenly. Have I told you that today? Only 3 times. Not nearly enough then. He pulled her closer. I love you, Nora called her. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for saving mine right back. As night settled over their valley, they went inside together, leaving the past in the darkness where it belonged. Tomorrow there would be work. There was always work on a farm. But tonight there was warmth and love, and the promise of all the tomorrows to come. The witch of Dustrock was no more. In her place stood Nora Calder, wife, healer, soon-to-be mother. She'd learned that sometimes the only curse that truly binds is the one we place on ourselves, and the only magic needed is the courage to let love burn away the fear. And in a small farmhouse in Colorado, as snow began to fall in earnest, that love burned bright and steady as a beacon, calling all the lost souls home. Thank you all for listening to this tale of love and redemption in the Old West. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this story from. Leave a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories that bring the frontier to life. Share your thoughts about Nora and Jace's journey in the comments. Until next time, partners.